you've written a screenplay or part of a screenplay, something like that, and you want some feedback, but you don't really know anybody that can critique screenplays. I mean, you might have some friends or relatives or people that write novels or short stories, but they're not really familiar with screenplays. So how can you get the feedback that you want that's going to help you, progress in your screenplay? So we're going to talk about some tips to help you do that, to get the feedback that you want. I'm going to give you some strategies for doing that, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for liking. If you find value, please be sure to do that. Subscribe if you haven't. I really appreciate it. Interact in some way, leave a comment, share it, whatever you want to do. I really appreciate it. It helps other people find this channel. So thank you in advance for doing those things. Let's jump in. Getting feedback is a must for any writer. Doesn't matter what you're writing. It's important to get some feedback on what you're writing. But if you don't know anyone in the industry, it's hard to get feedback. If you're not really friends with other screenwriters, you're just kind of starting out. Am I doing this right? I don't know. So I want to give you 4 tips that's just going to kind of help you. And then I'll give you some questions that you can use to ask other people so you can ask them to comment about those things about your writing. And that will give you a place to start and should be helpful to you and get you some information about your story and about what you're writing that will be helpful to you so that you can improve it and become a better writer. Tip number 1 is this: give a reasonable time and expectation for feedback. So you share something, it should not be hey, I'm giving this to you today, can you give me notes on it tomorrow? Okay, that's a little unreasonable. If you give something to someone and you're kind of like, hey, give it to me whenever, well, they're going to push it down to the bottom of the pile. They're probably not going to get to it. You want kind of a time frame, like, hey, if I send you a script or if I send you part of a story, can you look at that and get back to me in the next 2 weeks or in the next week? Do you have time to do that? It'll probably take you, if it's a full screenplay, it'll probably take you, a couple hours to read. It's a full film. So can you do that? Do you mind doing that? Or if I just send you 20 pages or what, negotiate those things ahead of time. Give some expectations for what you want to have happen by when. That can be really helpful because now people know what they're getting into. And a second tip I will give you, which kind of dovetails with this first one, is give specific questions. So, hey, would you mind reading the screenplay? I'm going to give you 5 questions. And if you can just answer those 5 questions after you read it, that will be really helpful to me. Can you do that in the next couple weeks? That's kind of what you want. That's the ask that you want to give to people, especially if they are not familiar with screenplays and screenwriting at all. Give them something specific because they're going to be like, well, I don't know. I've never really read a movie. Or do you read movies? That will be a question you might get. Can you read a movie? I don't know how this works. Don't just have them respond willy-nilly, right? I'll just respond however. No. Give them some focused feedback because people that aren't familiar with it aren't really sure what to tell you. And if you don't tell them anything, they're going to resort to things like grammar and formatting, which they may not fully understand anyway, and punctuation and things that just don't really matter. So you want to give them some specific questions that will get you better feedback. Tip number 3 is only ask for feedback from people who like the stories that you are writing. If you have a friend who really loves horror, but you've written a rom-com, okay, probably not great to ask them, even if they're a little familiar with screenplays. If they're just starting out and they're wanting to write a horror movie and you're writing a rom-com, okay, they're going to give you some notes, but they're probably not going to be as good as somebody that really loves rom-coms. So if you can find other people that like what you write, that's going to be better. Now, is that an automatic no if they don't? Well, no, of course not, right? Your friend who writes horror films, that's starting to write horror films, can give you just as good a feedback, especially if you're giving them expectation and you're giving them specific questions to respond to. So they don't have to, but it can be really helpful if that person really likes what you're doing. So that would be a tip. You're going to get better feedback if they are familiar and like the type of stories that you are writing. Tip number 4, and this mostly applies if you're in a writing group or a group of people that are exchanging things. This is my best tip, is model the behavior and the feedback that you want to get. It's kind of that do unto others as you would have them do unto you kind of thing. Show them the type of feedback that you are wanting by giving them the feedback that you actually kind of want. You're kind of answering your questions that you give to them about their script, even if they haven't asked you for that. You doing that helps to model the type of feedback that you want. And sometimes that can help shape and change the type of feedback and the kind of the vibe of the group and make it a little more helpful, because people start to be a little more honest, they're a little more caring, they're a little more concerned, and they're focusing on the story and not the storyteller when giving the feedback. And those things can be really helpful. And maybe like a bonus fifth tip is, and I kind of just mentioned this, is when you give feedback to other people, so you're modeling the behavior, give feedback about the story, not the person. Okay, you have this artifact. They gave you an artifact, the story. So comment about the story. This part of the story isn't working, okay? Or this is done really well. Sounds very different than you did this really well, and which people might like, right? But they're not going to like the you didn't do this very well. They're not going to like that. But it's okay if it's, this isn't working very well in the story. I was a little confused. Instead of saying, you confused me when, right? So make your comments about the artifact and not the person. And if you can start to model that kind of behavior, it's going to go a long way in you getting the feedback that's going to be helpful to you. So if you have some questions to ask them, because you've said like, hey, can you do this in the next couple of weeks? Here's some questions, to feedback, give me some feedback on. You might be thinking like, okay, but Jake, what are some questions I can ask? Well, I'm going to tell you. The thing with questions is you really only want to limit them to like 3 to 5 questions. If you start asking less than 3, you're not going to get enough feedback. And if you start asking more than 5, people are either going to start giving you too short of answers, which may not be helpful because they're trying to get through all 7 or 10. I mean, 5 sounds like a manageable number. 6, well, that starts to sound like a lot, right? So 3 is even better. 4 is fine. So, somewhere in there, if you're asking 3, 4, 5 questions of people, it can be really helpful. So try not to ask too many. So keep them focused, keep them tight. And you can always ask those questions and you're like, but Jake, I've got like 10 questions I want to ask. That's fine. The first time, ask them 3 to 5, get their feedback, make changes that you need to make, then ask again and ask 3 or 4 other ones. So you can still go through all 10 if you want to, but just not at once. Okay. So just, pace yourself. So let me give you 5 questions that you can ask. So you can take these, you can add to them, you can modify them, whatever you want to do, but these 5 will at least get you started. Number 1, what did you like best, or what do you think I should not change in a subsequent draft? So you're asking essentially, what are the best pieces? What are the things I should not change? What did you like? It's basically what's working. Number 2, in 1 or 2 sentences, summarize the story. What happens and how does it end? Now remember, a story is about someone who wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. Your readers should be able to articulate those pieces back to you. What is my story about? And if they can't figure out who the main character is, if they can't figure out what the main character is after, okay, you got problems, right? So this is a really helpful question to make sure that your story is coming across and is coming across clearly so that they can track with it. Question number 3, what are 2 things you'd suggest I focus on in my next draft? So you're asking essentially, what are some places for improvement? What are suggestions you have? What are things that you think I need to improve? Question 4, was there any point where you were confused about what was happening? And if so, where? So when they're summarizing the story, if they're having trouble, okay, you definitely want to ask this question. Where were you confused? What were you confused about? The last question is about storytelling. How did you feel as you read the story? And do you think that's how you are supposed to feel? So the person's reading your script, right? And it seems like a comedy, but they're not laughing. Okay, that's what this question is getting at. Well, I felt like I was supposed to be laughing, but honestly, I didn't laugh but like 2 times. What were the 2 times? Well, it was the ones I mentioned. Like, don't change those. Okay, so those are funny. The others are not funny. This is why it's a storytelling question. It's how is the audience emotionally responding to your story? Because you have your story and then you got to tell it. But you want them to emotionally respond to the story. So ask a question, storytelling related, about how did they feel? Did they like how they felt? Did they felt like their feelings were the right feelings they should have at the right moment, right? Oh, it's a horror movie, but I was never really scared. That's a problem if it's a horror movie, right? So you want to find that out. So this is a really helpful question to ask. And again, you don't have to ask all 5 of these. You can ask some of them, you can add others in. These are just here to get you started. One other thing with these questions is the first question is important. It's what did you like? Always start off when you are criticizing other people's work. If you're trying to model, always start off with what's good. What's good? Here's what I liked. I thought this was funny. I really liked this moment. I liked this character. I liked this beat. I liked this setting. Whatever it is, here's specific things I liked about the story. Not necessarily you, the storyteller, the story, right? I'm commenting on the artifact. So what are some things I like? So however you phrase your questions, your first question should always be something positive. Get some good feedback. What's working? What are you doing well? That just helps the mood of the room. If you're in a physical room, it helps soften some of the other comments. It lets people feel like they can be a little more candid and honest with you. So a lot of good things here. Start with a positive thing. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. If it has, please be sure to like, subscribe, bell. I really appreciate it. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for interacting in some way. It's just really helpful. When you go to tell a story, and you're gonna tell a story at some point, and you're gonna get some feedback. So when you tell that story, tell a story that matters. See you later.